Hey everyone, this is Fran from the 5 Minute Modeler, and I hope you're doing well. Well, after recovering from my first cold of the season, my grandson came over and we were running trains on the layout, and during that time I believe he generously gave me the flu. That sidelined me for almost a week and slowed down some of the progress on the module, but since then I've recovered and I've been able to get a lot accomplished that I'd like to share with you today. As you can see from these introduction video shots, the module is almost done. Some might call it done, but there's still a few more things I want to add that we should be able to get it running. I had to send my throttles back to NCE for repair, though, as when the grandson and I were running trains, the cab throttle stopped responding, and I sent an email to NCE, and they quickly responded with some tips on resetting it, etc. But despite those, nothing worked, so I had to send it off to them. This is the second time I've had to deal with NCE, and they've always been very responsive, and this has kept me as a loyal customer. So one of the elements of the model railroad that really sets them apart, I think, from so many is the installation of a fascia board. This adds a bit of professional finishing to the layout and hides some of that ugly raw lumber. I had planned to add the fascia from the beginning, but didn't want to do it until I had the scenery roughed out, as there were going to be different elevations. I didn't have the masonite hardboard that I used, so this still was delayed a little bit. Once I got the masonite, I cut 2 4-foot long pieces to match the contours of the layout using my table saw, and then one piece for the end. The other end will be connected to my layout most of the time. I painted these hunter green semi-gloss paint, which is what I used for my layout, and after aligning the pieces to the module, I clamped them to the framing, then drilled pilot holes about 1 foot apart. I then used these finishing washers with round head screws to attach the fascia, which gives it a clean, professional look. I think you'll agree it makes a big difference. In a previous episode, I described how I built the bollards for tying the ship down to the dock. I'll link to it here. Since these were all on one bamboo skewer, I cut them off with my razor saw, then touched up the paint. The bollards would be placed alongside the ship on the wharf, so I drilled the holes slightly smaller than the bollard, added a bit of Eileen's glue in each hole, and press fit it into each hole. Excess glue is cleaned up, and once dry, any excess was invisible at that point. When test fitting the ship, I realized I needed to slightly adjust the curve on the track entering the apron. This was because some of the rock on the wharf was interfering with the location of the ship. After adjusting the ship, I loosened about 6 inches of the track from the ballast and bent it to the appropriate curve in order to provide a straight entrance to the apron in the ship. I secured the track, then added some new ballast. I sprayed that with my water alcohol mixture and then used Woodland Scenic cement mixed with a 50/50 IPA. This glue did not mix well at all with the IPA, and you can see the clumps of glue along the track. I took a chance and allowed it to dry. As it turns out, it dried clear and must have settled into the ballast, as I don't see any remnants of the glue. But in the future, I think I'll stick to PVA glue for this. I also had a section of land that needed ground cover. This was at the back of the layout, and I used the remainder of that Woodland Scenic glue and lumps and all, and spread it around with the paintbrush. Once the area was covered, I used various shades of fine ground foam to the wet surface. I then used small pieces of foliage clusters and used additional glue to secure them. I then added some static grass, both with the static grass applicator and several of the stab and stick individual clumps. Because this side of the module is going to be up against the backdrop, I wanted to hide the edge of the layout, so I used the foliage cluster pieces along the back side, and that should provide a nice scenic break from the stark edge of the module. One of the concerns I have is how to secure the ship. While I don't plan on moving the module far, it likely will be moved several times between the layout and my workbench. I decided to create a keyhole method by using stacked foam board. I glued a U-shaped piece to the water, then glued the inside portion of the U to the bottom of the ship. Once aligned properly, the ship didn't move and the foam provided enough flexibility for it to move slightly if needed for removal. I had been dreading the next step, which was to paint the water on the seaside of the wharf. You may recall I created the water forms with the toilet paper and diluted white glue mixture in one of my earlier episodes. This held up well through all of the other scenicking, but now it was time to paint it. I wanted to capture both the clarity and color of the water, as I had captured in some screenshots from Google Satellite View. Using a mixture of acrylic tan and green, I began by painting the edge of the water against the rocks. I wasn't too concerned that the color matched, as the variety would add to the different depths along the shore. The shore also falls off fairly quickly to deeper water, so this layer didn't need to be too wide. I then mixed a combination of green, raw umber, cerulean blue, and a touch of red. Since it was a bit dark, I added a touch of white and began blending that into the shoreline color. I didn't want any stark changes to the color, so I added a bit of IPA when I needed to blend the colors a bit more. I spread this mixture out about an inch or so from the shore. For the final piece, I took that same mixture and added a bit more blue. As I spread this around, I noticed that in some places where I didn't have as much dark pigment, it made the water appear to be a bit shallower, and the darker the blue, the deeper the water. This was just the look I was going for. I let this dry overnight, and the next day I did have to touch up a few spots where I'd missed them earlier. I then dry brushed some white paint on the top of the waves, and once that dried, I used several coats of gloss medium to provide the wet water look. Overall, I think it turned out nicely. I mentioned that the apron and supporting structure is somewhat fragile. Right? Actually, it's really the pieces that support the counterweight that are really fragile. There's really not anything holding it to the crossbeam outside of the glue that I'm using, which is CAA. While the counterweights aren't heavy, they do tend to pull the supports down. Additionally, they're actually skewed on the crossbeam, so they're wider on the weight side so that the weights fall to the side of the bridge, and they're narrower at the ship side of it where the cables are connected to the bridge to raise and lower it. But in the picture, you can see where I was supporting the counterweights with the shim until the glue dried. To me, however, this is one of the showpieces of the module. So the module isn't done, but it's close. I think it's looking better than I expected, and it captures the flavor of the scene. I have a few more details to add, such as railings for the apron, guardrails for the road, and toning down some of the green field grass. I also need to paint the backdrop. Once I complete those, then it will be time to fit to the layout and connect the wiring. I hope you found this interesting and some useful tips and methods. These aren't the only way to do these things, but just the way I did them at this time. I may do it different another time. So, thanks again for watching another episode of the 5-Minute Modeler, and I hope you have a great week.